was looking for an opportunity of where is this intersection between data that's kind of sitting there that isn't being used. Regulated industries is an interesting space because data is, number one, they have a lot of it, and it's typically seen as a liability. Mindspan kind of fit the bill. A lot of companies that just do like data analytics or data analysis will kind of shy away from because it's hard to do. That kind of makes it attractive. Hey, we could do this thing that nobody else can or is willing to do.
Welcome to Mangtas Nation, a podcast where tech entrepreneurs and industry experts come together to share diverse perspectives and real-world experiences around the latest tech trends and innovations. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts right now. Hello and welcome to our show, Rich. Thank you for taking the time to be a guest on our Mangtas Nation podcast today.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Rich is the CEO of Mindspan Systems, a software and data solutions consultancy that helps community financial institutions win with data. But before we get to know more about AI and machine learning and finance and more about what you do, Rich, tell us first a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. I'm kind of an unlikely entrepreneur. And owner of a business. My background is in engineering and operations. I have an engineering undergraduate. I'd spent some time in the Army, and this was a long time ago in the 90s, which was a very different experience then. As an engineer officer, I worked in operations and manufacturing for a while. And then after going back to school and getting my MBA, I went and worked at IBM and ended up in the software business. And I was there for a little over 13 years. And just by happenstance of kind of being the data guy, data analyst guy, ended up in product management and was working on data center operations, IT infrastructure type things, and gravitated towards the financial services banking industry, and spent a good chunk of time there. Worked in that industry from like 2008 to 13, which was, needless to say, an interesting time to be there, but saw a lot of like upheaval and chaos and how that shook out, and how being in a regulated industry, particularly when there was like a lot of regulation being written, how that had like a lot of impact on the businesses and the customers, and kind of being, one of the big prime suppliers for Wall Street and a lot of central banks, federal agencies, et cetera, how that kind of played out, right? And how that kind of shaped where that whole industry was going. And so I worked there through I think it was about mid-13, and I got tapped, not because of who I am, but more because I was a guy that kind of knew how to get things done in the big IBM machine, to go work for this new business unit that eventually became the Watson business unit, artificial intelligence.
That was your entrepreneurial mindset.
I guess I was more like I knew how to like work all the process stuff. For like new offerings, right? Which is not broadly done. Excuse me, not broadly done in IBM, right? Like it wasn't a velocity of like brand new products all the time, right? It was like incremental on like a very, very large portfolio, and when like new stuff came in, most of the time it was through acquisition. So doing something brand new from scratch inside a new business unit, going after new customers, that was kind of unique. So I was kind of the process whisperer a little bit on the product side, like getting things done, and
pushing them to go out.
But
of
it was
their
also an
zone.
Opportunity. Yeah, there was a lot of that. We had a lot of help. It was really interesting because it kind of came in about the time when they very much jumped in with both feet into the idea around design thinking, and created a whole competency around design and design thinking, and harken back to like the 50s and 60s, when IBM was at the cutting edge from a design standpoint. They tapped like the Paul Rand work around the logo, the whole thing, but created like a whole business unit and a whole plan. A whole career path specifically around design that was like on par with engineering. Like it was very, very impressive what was done. So we because we were kind of coming up at the same time, they picked some of the offerings within Watson to kind of be these marquee offerings. So we just had a tremendous amount of support and the resources that were available. I remember telling somebody one of the individual products that we were working on in the portfolio, they used it in like the NFL playoff commercials that IBM was using, right? Which is kind of cool, right? Now, I know it wasn't necessarily an ad for my product. It was an ad for IBM, and we were kind of like the shiny cool thing that they could use in the ad. That's fine. It was cool nonetheless, right? To kind of have that experience. But what the offering was, what was kind of unique, it was saying there was a lot of things that had been going on. The Jeopardy work had been like a really big deal, and they kind of dovetailed that into some of the knowledge management work that was being done in healthcare. That got a lot of press at the time, right? There was a lot of things that was being done around cancer research and cancer treatment and kind of working with frontline doctors. What we were doing was saying, let's take some of the resources and assets that we have, particularly like the immense amount of intellectual capital that was sitting in IBM Research, which is IBM Research was and is a lot more like a university. That there was, armies and armies of people that were effectively doing postdocs, right, in research, and there was a whole section of work in there that was being done around natural language processing, and it was like great stuff, like great work, really interesting research, nothing that really had a path to becoming part of a product or a market, and we were trying to create that, right, stitch that together, and what we were trying to do is create
Sorry.
No. I was getting to be an old man by that point. So, yeah, no,
I 30 years.
So, yeah, it was within IBM. Let me see. This was like 2013, so I had been there, almost 10 years at that point, and doing this. So I was the process guy and I had the team of people kind of working for me, doing a lot of the day-to-day nuts and bolts, going to all the meetings, but then also going out and meeting with customers, particularly new types of customers, because this was going to be let's allow you to build on top of our platform. And the kind of route to market that we had was we created, it was basically an API cloud service, where there was all these things that you would be able to do with very discrete point products, right? Like there was some like sentiment analysis solutions, right? Like, hey, I have this text that's in, say, a chat or a call center exchange. Is the person on the other end of this happy, angry, sad, right? Like things like that, right? Or give me the probability that this is a very tense emotional conversation that's going on, right? Or things like that. There was a dialogue solution that you could kind of think of as like an early version of a chatbot that would be able to handle a relatively fixed corpus of knowledge. Think like an FAQ type solution or a knowledge-based solution where you could ask questions and kind of get like very discrete answers. The answer is X, the answer is Y, right? Things like that. This is like, you were talking way before like ChatGPT, like that type of capability. It was way more rudimentary, but was fairly unique in the market at the time. And it was for our customers to build on top of. Which was part of it was like building a partner ecosystem around that. And it was, again, there was a lot of moving parts that were kind of like new and unique for a company like IBM to do. So it was great. It was really interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was funny because, I when I was on the data center side, it was a fairly large business, fairly substantial business we were doing, and but also kind of boring. Stayed and boring, and it was hard to
It was just IBM. It was just fairly large.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of zeros on the business, but it was also like not a lot of people were interested in talking to you about it, right? It was kind of like a very select few, and usually it was like, yeah, I've been your customer for 15 years, and here's 6 things I want you to do, right? It was like those type of conversations.
And then just do what you're doing. I don't care about the how you do it.
But at the time with Watson, it was like I had to kind of enter this new phase of like, okay, you're going to speak 40 or 50 times a year to kind of go to small groups, because we were talking to developers. So we would go to like all of the hackathons, like little tiny ones at universities, and I think for 3 years there, we were one of like the gold level sponsors for TechCrunch. So we would go to the TechCrunch hackathon that happened before the conference. They ended up doing a partnership with the X Prize organization at one point, right? So it was kind of high flying for what I was used to, and it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. And from a strategic standpoint, they kind of started to move away from that and really say, we're more interested in the enterprise level service business that we're doing. And that was kind of where the focus became. And I was less interested in doing that. And I kind of knew it was time to move on at that point. But I kind of seen where this was going, right? It was interesting, particularly from the standpoint of, this is going to be a way in which a lot of companies are going to find a new life or a first life for a lot of the data that they have, a lot of the information, particularly unstructured data. And again, there was a heavy slant. It wasn't exclusively, but a heavy slant towards natural language processing, like understanding things that aren't tables and rows and information, but hey, it's buried in this JSON file somewhere, or it is just straight text. And being able to understand that from a machine standpoint, right? From an algorithmic standpoint, and applying a lot of different techniques, processes, algorithms, from a machine learning standpoint to solve fairly novel problems. For customers, and so it was kind of making that bridge between those two things.
And speaking of solving problems,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Rich. Well, speaking of solving problems,
no. I was just the next jump is how I got to Mindspan. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we're on the same wavelength now.
Yeah.
Yes, let's. I was just about to ask. Yes, talking about solving problems. Let's talk about Mindspan Systems, your company, and what your vision is, and what actually propelled you to do what you're doing now. Yeah.
So, the thing I was looking for is, in a couple of times earlier in my career, I kind of had the entrepreneurial itch, right? Like let's go do the thing. And at this point, I'm in my mid 40s, and it's like, look, you're either going to do this now or you're not going to do it, right? You got to kind of have to pick which way you're going to go. And I had to say it was a thesis, an investment thesis, is probably overstating it, making it sound fancier and more thought out than it was. But
let's say choose your own adventure.
I was kind of looking for, yeah, sure. I was looking for an opportunity of where is this intersection between data that's kind of sitting there that isn't being used. And the part that I got into, and certainly my angle of having had experience in financial services and banking, it was like regulated industries is an interesting space because data is, number one, they have a lot of it, but then also it has a lot of focus on it certainly from a compliance standpoint. And it's typically seen as a liability that whether it's financial services or healthcare, there's a concern, or certainly intelligence and government side, there's a concern about like this is a thing to be protected, and not allow access to, right? And so it kind of gets locked down, but that also means it doesn't get utilized very well, particularly by people who could get a lot of value out of it. So I was kind of looking for a smaller company, and I wasn't really sure if it was going to be like software or platform or, like consulting, like services, but somebody who had experience in this area. And Mindspan kind of fit the bill. It was a company that was about 15, 16 years old at that point, but had done a lot of work with financial services companies, with some healthcare companies on the software and manufacturing side, healthcare device side. And had this ability to kind of operate and do things in a regulated environment. There's things from like insurance and how contracting works. And there's a little bit of a hurdle there that a lot of companies that just do like data analytics or data analysis will kind of shy away from, because it's hard to do. But that kind of makes it attractive, right? From hey, we could do this thing that nobody else can or is willing to do, right? For business model reasons. So that made Mindspan attractive. And I found the founder who was kind of ready to kind of do the next thing and was kind of looking for the right person to move forward with it. And we were able to do a deal, and I bought the company from him in 2018.
Nice.
So
excellent.
that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
And what? So basically, we picked up a lot of snippets of information.
Yeah.
Financial industry.
Mm-hmm.
You like regulated space. The fact that they have a lot of data, they protect it well, they underutilize it, so there's a massive business opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is it exactly that you do, Rich?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of ways. Most times when we deal with a new client, with a new customer, they will have some like very specific problem they're trying to solve, and it typically has to do with I have this problem. I know I should be able to answer this specific question or a series of questions like this because I know I have the information, but it exists in 12 different places, or it's in this weird format, or I can figure it out, but it takes me so long to do it. By the time I get the information, I really can't take action on it, right? I'll give you one example. We worked with a healthcare device company, and they had this model where they had these like capital intensive sales that they were selling, like big heavy equipment that was millions, tens of millions of dollars type, like almost like construction management projects, right? When they would sell these things, and then they would make a substantial amount of their revenue and profit on the services of that, like long term. And they had put together their service contracts from essentially an acquisition of several different organizations. So, across, at least in the US, they would have a half dozen or so different ways of doing service that were out there. And what they found was there was like wide variability in their ability to control inventory that was in the field, the service level that they were able to bring together, and just saying like, hey, just show me, how much money do we have in inventory for like these very high value parts that are out there, in a way that I can match that to the service level that we've sold, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, whatever level service to that customer. Let's try to match that up, right? So that I understand I'm investing in the right place. And it was like all upside down and backwards. And, the vice president that was running Midwest had a different set of metrics than the vice president that was running Northeast. And, they couldn't bring it all together. And they were like, just help me do this one thing that I can kind of look at a single page and I can look at it once a month, right? And we kind of helped them with that like very short tactical problem. And that was a lot of like, heavy lifting and all that. And they were like, oh my gosh, here's like 10 things we can do to save us probably tens of millions of dollars within the first couple of years, right? From a transformation standpoint. Sure. Yeah. A lot of zeros. But it was like uncovering this huge opportunity that they had sitting in front of them that they didn't even realize. Right. And when we did that and put a little bit of rigor around it and made it so that instead of being able to look at that once a month, we could look at it once a week and then eventually once a day. That allowed them to really speed up the cycle time of, they embrace continuous improvement very strong. So like their Kaizen events that they were doing, right? Like let's go in and, do projects to kind of really get our heads, our arms wrapped around like this particular project. The cycle time on that went way down, right? It was from months to weeks to days, and the number of experiments went up, and then it got into like how they did customer service and, their ability to serve their customers a lot better, be way more efficient about it, and really change some key ratios around their profitability, right? But it was exposing what was really going on, and the information was there all along. It wasn't accessible to the people who needed it. Like their governance was not great. And it didn't exist in a way that was easily accessible to the people that needed it in a timely manner, right? So that's the type of problems that we solve. They tend to be more market facing, more about like how can we better serve our customers than necessarily internal efficiency. But that's kind of what we do. That heavy lifting part, that you're going to do that maybe once or twice or have an ongoing solution going forward to kind of maintain it. But it's not something you're going to build a competence around, right?
Got it. So getting real insights into data and really making that a sustainable solution. And Rich, what's your secret sauce? Like what do you do differently from how do you solve these problems? Let me put it this way. If you go a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Especially as a CEO
there's certainly
of a company.
Yeah. I mean, there's an element of just like sheer experience, the number of times you've seen the problem, right? The number of different situations, and kind of being able to classify it to go, oh, I understand like the issue here. Now, that's really not the hard part so much as it is being able to kind of work with organizations that have their own politics, that have their own, a lot of times, divergent goals and aspirations, and try to kind of bring them together. You kind of think like, well, what type of people do you have working for you? And obviously there's a lot of like technical folks. We have architects, we have data engineers, we have machine learning scientists, data scientists, but I also have organizational change management people, right, that kind of work for me, which you kind of think is like a lot more of a soft skill. But it's that idea of saying, yeah, you may have a project management office that's going to like handle some of this or maybe pick it up from us when we're done. But getting to the point of having people embrace what we're doing here, to say, we're going to go from this is how we've always done things, or, I'm going to use my gut because I don't have enough information around it, to we're really going to be a lot more data driven about our approach, at least in this one context. That is a real hard leap to make, particularly the age of the company that's been around, right? Like how entrenched is the process of the approach that you're doing. And it's that first project, right? There's some crack that's opening up, right? Something that shows like, oh, we may not be in crisis, but you kind of see that there's a problem coming. And it's kind of helping them take that and use that as momentum to kind of really do a transformation, right? A lot of times, our typical MO of how we work is, we're there to fill an immediate gap, right? We're helping them with a competency, an approach that they don't have, or they haven't well developed, or it's like very much in isolation, right? So we're going to come in there and help them close that. But then it's also about helping them build that capability in-house, right? Like I'm going to help you. We're going to close the gap and get you there. But then I'm also going to help you build out what you need to do, the skills you need to have in-house, whether that's training or we'll do long-term staff augmentation, or we'll help you place somebody in there, or just help you from like a coaching standpoint from your initial task, but so that you're good, you've got what you need, and you don't need us. You're not dependent on us long term, right? And that's pretty much what we do. Now, invariably, there's a lot of adjacent opportunity, and we go on to kind of do other things, particularly in larger organizations. But that's typically how we work, and that's our reputation.
And how do you? I don't know. I'm guess it's a very familiar problem to you. Like people, especially if it's data's all over the place, right? And people have things on their local files, on Excels, and do their own little things and their own little formulas, and then you bring in something beautiful, and then within a week everyone is back on their Excel files enhancing the system because just a little bit missing, and instead of fixing it there, they take it offline and fix it there. And so how do you convince companies to really stick to it, right? What's the secret sauce for that?
I think this is kind of where like the product management hat comes on, right? Because it's understanding things from a customer needs standpoint, right? And your customer a lot of time is being the people in those organizations, right? And it's solving their problem that they have in a way that they're like, oh no, this is good. Like you have helped me do my job a lot easier. And the approach here is like I'm all in. I'm an advocate for what you're doing, and I'm very happy, as opposed to it's just a technical requirement, right? It's and part of that is, people say, well, what are type of the things you do, and you can have like a technical discussion, like, well, data warehousing usually plays into it, and sometimes it's cloud data warehouse, and we'll partner with larger organizations like Snowflake, or Azure is big in financial services. Microsoft is kind of like default answer on the cloud side. But it's not like we just have this one solution that we bring in, right? I'll contrast that with maybe what you typically see in like the data analytics space, right? This is kind of a trope, and I'll take the heat for it not being super accurate. But a lot of times you'll see CEO sits down, they kind of read Business Insider, and it's like, wow, we really need to kind of up our game from a data analytics standpoint. I don't necessarily have a specific use case or part of what we're doing, nothing that would be a business case, but we're going to do that. So next year, I'm going to put $2 million into our budget for us to go do a pilot with like Tableau or somebody, right? And, we're going to buy their full stack of solutions, and 30% of it's going to be professional services, and we're going to roll with it, right? And a lot of times those things turn into, hammer looking for a nail. And frankly, a lot of times it works out. You kind of get lucky, you stumble upon the thing, and you find like the one project that's like, oh, this was the thing, we hit it out of the park. And, we made back 10x on our investment, and everybody looks smart, right? And that's perfectly fine. But you got to be a pretty large organization for that to pan out, and have a high enough level sponsor that's saying, this is a thing that we're doing, meaning this is going to be part of your evaluation next year, so you better participate in it, right? To be able to kind of, after the fact, stumble upon the thing that really turns out. And like I said, our approach is like, we're in there solving like a very specific pain that somebody has. And then there's a broader opportunity that kind of comes out of it. So that's how I would kind of frame it, as far as kind of what we do and like how that's atypical.
Understood. So maybe shifting gears a little bit, right? And given how AI is becoming this buzzword again, right? After a couple of years, after blockchain and Meta, now it's back to AI. Given you're in the financial services industry as well, at least a big part of your background is there. What is your view on AI applied to financial services? where all of that is heading, especially in the context, I would say, of regulations as well, right? Like financial services being regulated, AI not yet being regulated, but will be at some point. Where's all of that heading? What's your view? What's your vision?
I mean, making predictions is a good way to be wrong all the time. But, I'll tell you from this standpoint, I mean, there's certainly opportunity. And, I think we're still early in this. Like, I don't think, if you kind of think of it from like an S-curve standpoint of like where this is going, particularly when you're looking at things like large language models like ChatGPT, right? It could be that this is it. We're at the end of it, and this is kind of peters out, and it kind of becomes like, this is a great tool. Add it into what you're doing. Anytime you add text, you can kind of have this writing agent that'll give, here's 3 more ideas, or let's do 50% better grammar. Certainly on the code side, you see that as like an efficiency standpoint. Things like Microsoft's Copilot, right, and similar solutions. I think there's a lot more to go. And one of the things about this, it's very much at the not good enough stage yet. Particularly, you look at things about the ability for a large language model to answer questions definitively, the whole hallucination issue. And it's not quite there from an efficiency standpoint. You look at like the particularly training costs for training a corpus of information. It's still kind of cost prohibitive for many use cases. I'm assuming that will change. That will become way more efficient and easier. You look at a lot of what has come out of the open source community around this, and it's just like we're on Moore's law, right, from that standpoint. So I kind of expect there'll be a couple more shortcuts that show up, much like transformers were that got us to ChatGPT, that will become more efficient and more accessible. Okay, so what then? My premise is, number one, the technology itself will be commoditized, meaning all of the power and therefore a lot of the profits are not necessarily going to flow to an entity like OpenAI. The ones that generate the technology that makes it work. Where the value is going to go to is the information that goes into the training. So the first party data that organizations have, the things that they have about their company, their customers, their market, the operations of things that go, the things that are kind of proprietary to them, that for most companies, particularly regulated companies, are the ones that are like kind of locked under this like compliance blanket. That is only going to become more and more valuable as a business asset, particularly one that they're going to be able to use to be more competitive and actually probably create some moats around their business. Things that they know, things that they're able to do that their competitors can't. And so you look at things like, the ancillary trends, like the elimination of third-party cookies that you kind of see this kind of slow train wreck from an ad tech standpoint between what Google's doing, Apple's ATT on mobile, this whole idea of the surveillance layer that, once was the purview of, all your digital ad platforms, that's eroding. And the value is going to, it's your website, your understanding of how your customers are using it or interacting with it, what they're doing, the type of queries, they're making. That is very much becoming this, like it's adding to this first party gold mine, right? That's in it. All of that you're going to own, you're going to understand that, and you're going to be able to leverage that in a way that will add value to your business. So I am very long on first party data, the value of first party data, and that the mindset should be, it is, and again, particularly from a liability standpoint, right? Like that data that you have is going to be less of a concern from a compliance standpoint and more of this is as much as an operating asset as anything else that you have, even if it's in an intangible way, as anything else that you're doing to try to find a competitive advantage, your own data. That will be the core of how you compete in the future.
Excellent. I asked all my questions, Jackie. I love it. I love how AI is now.
You got to try some hard ones. Those are easy. Yeah.
AI is a commodity, and the data is where the real value lies, right? That's a major shift, right?
Sure. Yeah.
If you told me this a
it's
year
only being
ago,
accelerated by the technology, right? And technology is its core. It's just a new way to do something, right? I mean, that's what it is. Whether it's a shovel instead of a stick. Yeah.
All of these people working in financial institutions, in anything, all of this data that they also can unknowingly put into ChatGPT. Like, for example, you know what I'm talking about. So it's still a little bit in its infancy, let's say.
And that's an emerging opportunity as well. I know there's companies that are kind of doing we're going to provide a layer of protection or compliance for you that's going to sit between your organization and whatever cloud, ChatGPT or LLM provider that you have, to make sure you're not passing back and forth personal health information if you're a HIPAA, related entity. Personally identifiable information if you fall into that one, which financial services has like 8 agencies that look at them from that. But even like your own intellectual capital, right? Your things about your own code base or your own code structure or how your security's out, right? All of those things, like being able to filter that out so that you can take advantage of a lot of the technology without really exposing yourself or giving up that information that, again, is going to be a lot more valuable to you as you go forward.
All right. Fantastic insights from the CEO of Mindspan Systems, Rich Edwards. Rich, thank you very much for taking the time again to be with us today. And I hope to our listeners, you got a lot from our conversation with Rich. Thank you for listening to this episode of Mangtas Nation. And, well, you can always tell us what you think by sending us a message or leaving us a comment. And we promise to be back next time with another great guest. Rich, thank you very much for your time. And if there's
anytime, thanks for having me.
Or anybody who would like to get in touch with you or reach you, where can they best find you? Or how can they best get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm Rich Edwards on both platforms, the LinkedIn /Rich Edwards, Twitter /Rich Edwards, and our company's mindspaninc.com.
We'll make sure to include it in the show notes. So once again, Rich, thank you for your time. This is Jackie de Munk.
And Wouter Delbare.
Stay tuned for another episode of Mangtas Nation.
Thank you for tuning in to Mangtas Nation. Mangtas, your curated marketplace for B2B outsourcing solutions. Follow our social media pages to know more about us. Sign up as a client or sign up as a vendor and be part of this global B2B marketplace. Join us at www.mangtas.com.